While you can do a lot with series, ranges and functions, sometimes you want a more intuitive control, something more visual. As an architect, you usually prefer a visual way of expressing geometry or form or shape. What we want to do is use the params input graph mapper. And a graph mapper is a way to deform or change or tweak a series or a range of numbers. Now, it's a component that controls a series of values visually as a function. And we can set it to different types of graphs. For instance, a Bézier, conic, let's use a Bézier one, which controls you the input range, and the input range here goes between 0 and 1, and the output range as well, but we shift what happens in between. Now to do this, let's define range, set sequence range, use that range as an input, and then let's first display our results in a panel. So without any changes, the range from 0 to 1 would be deformed, would not be changed. But if we want to use, what we can do is shift the range a bit. So we start, for instance, we start at 1, we might end maybe a bit less, and then we can steer what happens in between. So that is a more visual way of controlling the way that the numbers flow between certain values. So let's connect it to the transform affine scale operation. So all of the moved objects will be scaled. Those are the different points, different transformed points. Let's transform them around their own center. So we use the same points we use for the movements and do the sequential scaling all around the same center. Let's disable the preview of this object. So now we see that we have a scale, and which is the scaling factor. Well, let's use the same one, but the one we control by the range factor. We only have to ensure that our total count of elements can be used. So for instance, we have, actually we want 6 values and our range. So let's define the total amount of steps. We need again to do some math operation and subtract 1 of that. So let's do 6 minus 1. I know what 6 minus 1 is, but it's easier to control it. Okay. And the domain of the range 0 to 1, that's fine, because in most cases then we don't have to adjust our graph mapper, because if the input changes, we have to adjust this. So now we can steer the scaling of the different moved and moved boxes. And we have boxes, we move them with different vectors, and then we scale them. And each of the different boxes scaled around the center of the transformed object, but scaled with a different value. And now we can use the graph mapper to control the scaling. So for instance, we want to start small, we make the element wider and smaller in a point, or we use a different shape. For instance, we bend inwards. So this way we have a more visual control over the scaling, and if we increase the step or we increase the total count, you see that it's completely adaptable. And still with a certain artistic visual control over the precise shape of the tower. So graph mapper is a good way of combining mathematics and a more visual control.